big sites, Defense Department sites, things like that, mostly where the federal government was involved. And so when I had communities such as yours, there'd be a discovery of an environmental problem. One of the things is most people don't know much about environmental science. You're hearing about it on the news all the time, but you don't have to deal with it all the time. And so when it hits your home, your life, it suddenly changes. You suddenly have to start learning something about things you never studied before. And so what I always like to do with every community was try and equip the people to understand all the things that are going to be coming at them. And some communities really took off. I've got one community now that actually talks to people in the White House about their site. They've gotten so engaged and so involved. And it's a really huge site with really huge problems. But so for some of you, hopefully you're not going to have to do a lot. Hopefully the Board of Water and Light is going to be a really responsible party, get in, get things done, and work really efficiently. It's one of those, when you have a recalcitrant business or something that you really, one of the things you have to understand as the public is you've got to fight for yourself. I worked for Eagle. I remember at the time, our district staff would have 500 sites they were assigned. 500 sites. They don't know what's going on, and then people, you find out that you've got to fight for yourself. And I did everything I could to help my communities and stuff, but a lot of times I had to become political and other things like that. So anyway, what I'm going to try to do today is equip you with some of the basics. So some of this stuff might seem way too simple for some of you, but for other people, it's like the first time. And you need to hear things multiple times, a lot of times, to understand. So anyway, I've already gone over my past and who I am. So the goals for this talk is to introduce you to the environmental aspects, characteristics of the Erickson environmental contamination site, so that you get a feeling for what's going on. You already have had your wells tested, a lot of you, so you're already aware of the potential or the problems. I want to introduce you to concepts of contaminant movement and at this site, and these are basic things that happen at any site in Michigan, but it'll be like a foreign language to some of you. I'm going to introduce some concepts of environmental investigation, because again, the environmental investigation, everything that's going to happen, whether your well's cleaned up or not, who is responsible for cleaning it up if it's a man-made problem, all that's going to be determined by the investigation. Now, I said the most critical thing in one of these sites is the investigation, because if you get that wrong, all your decisions are wrong. You can't evaluate even that health concern or the risk unless you know where the contamination is, how it got there, how much is still to come, those kinds of things. Then I'm going to try and explain a little bit the existing problems in the investigation. All right, the Board of Water and Light has hired a consultant. The consultant has done some work, but there are some problems. It's really early in the investigation, and one of the problems is, a lot of times I see this a lot, is they will jump to conclusions. They'll start with a little bit of data, and one of the conclusions that Board of Water and Light's consultant made was, well, there's no way the contamination could have made it to the residential wells. So right off the bat, myself and another geologist that's looked at this said they don't have enough data to say that. They don't have enough data at all. So to us as professionals, we can see that they shouldn't have said that yet. And so we'll talk a little bit about where the confusion is, where the complexity is. And I'll try not to get too deep in the weeds, but so you'll have to ask me if something's not clear. Just ask and stop me. If it gets to be too many, we'll have to wait till the end of the talk. But so anyway, that's quite a bit of introduction. here's some of the things we're going to talk about a little bit, very little on this first one. Now that I see that Eagle is here, somebody representing Eagle, they'll be able to talk to you probably more accurately about the standards that are being used at this site or should be used. And that's a really, really important thing. This is based on how toxic these chemicals are and what laws are in play and what the contamination needs to be cleaned up to. And it's based on a lot on how toxic the chemicals are. And that's not something I'm an expert on. The Eagle has experts on toxicity. And so even if the person here speaking to you tonight doesn't know a lot about toxicity or how the standards are achieved, he'll be able to research that for you. I said, all right, they're reading too much into the data already. They don't have enough data to say where their plume has gone. It's suspected that it's gone to the residential wells because there are elevated levels in those residential wells, but I'll explain to you why that's there's a complication with that. One of the things is we're going to talk a fair bit about is determining the background concentrations. What you've got with boron and lithium are two of the contaminants that have shown up in wells. Those are naturally occurring. They happen your wells are in the Saginaw Formation, and you can go other places and you can find boron and lithium in that formation. It just comes from the earth. Now, the question, and I'll give you an example. We moved out of the country, we had a well drilled, and it had fluoride in it. So you all know fluoride. Fluoride is what you got in your toothpaste. So it was naturally occurring fluoride, and fluoride's a poison if it's too much. But on the other hand, we put it in all kinds of things. So our water, our toothpaste, and other things. Put it on your kids' teeth at the dentist or whatever. So that tells you something about the toxicity of chemicals. Like in fluoride, in one case we use it as a medical preventive type thing, and on the flip side you get too much of it, it's a poison. And so that's the same problem you're going to have here at this site. Boron, for instance, shows up in wells all over Ingham County, and I'm sure in Delta Township as well. So we're going to talk about how do we know whether it is from the Erickson plant and it's elevated because of the contamination that happened there and it's got to your wells, or is it background? It's just naturally occurring. Bad luck. You got your well went into something that has some elevated levels. Just another example, if you go up to the thumb and the soils have more arsenic in them than is considered safe for direct contact. That's just natural. The glaciers hauled it down here, put it down there, and it's too high, but nobody put it there except for God. So then I'm going to talk a little bit about groundwater flow direction, because you're going to be talking about that, and that's one of the most foreign things to people that aren't familiar with this. It's like it's underground. You put a well down there and you get water, but you don't really know how it got there or where it's going or whatever. And that's a key to how your wells get contaminated, or how that groundwater flowed to your location. Okay, so I'm going to go over a little bit of the site characteristics. What is the Erickson site like? Just to give you a background on that. So here's a map of the site, and here's the plant. Here's the coal pile. Here's this is the most current air photo, and there's these things called hydro bins where they separated out the ash in those hydro bins and hauled it off. That's a more recent thing, and I'll talk about that a little bit. Then this is what's known as the forebay, the retention pond. This is the impoundment. Now this is what was the first place where they put the water and the ash historically, was this bigger area. In 2014 they closed this down and just create these things here. This is the Clearwater Pond. Then this is Lake Delta. Now Lake Delta is not a natural pond, and it's actually, they pump water in from the Grand River to keep the levels high enough. And the plant used to take water from Lake Delta for their process. So that's just the general layout of the thing. Okay, so here's the culprit. This is the stuff that's got your water contaminated. Well, we assume it's what's got your water contaminated right now. And this is fly ash and bottom ash. So when you burn coal, there are things in it that don't burn. You know, like you got ash left over. Fly ash is what goes up the stack, and bottom ash is what's left on the bottom. And in that, there are naturally occurring metals and other things. And those naturally occurring things are left over when the coal's burned. And so the boron and the lithium, the molybdenum, probably the dissolved total solids. What they did is they take this coal ash, you know, they burnt it, they got to get rid of it. This is just waste products. So they sluice it with water and run it out to those ponds. So, and because the water is there, it leaches out these metals and other things besides metals, but inorganic chemicals. They leach those out, and those get into the groundwater, and it gets into your well. So that's what it looks like. So here's the process, the original process, starting in 1970 to 2014. And what that was here would be the plant, you know, they'd have the coal burning, and they'd create the ash, and they would sluice it with water and pour it out here to this big impoundment area. And this impoundment, that was the 1970s. We did not design things very well. You know, people were not highly conscious of the environment in those days and not very aware. So I assumed that the bottom of this was not well constructed. And so that's where probably most of the problem was created, because the water just seeped out the bottom. So all that contaminated water would seep out. Not all of it, but a lot of it. After the ash, a lot of the ash settled out, then they would bring it over to the clear water pond, and I don't know exactly what happened, but I think it just cleared, you know, more ash came out, it became cleaner, and then they circulated the water back to continue the process. So it's just a loop. In 2014, they changed it. They closed out the impoundment, and they got these hydro bins. This is a more modern process. And they made the forebay and the retention basin. Those were two new basins. And these basins were up to much more modern standards. They had impermeable bottoms to them, much more protective of groundwater. And so they would go through these basins, end up in the clear water pond again, and then shoot back to the plant. So, but like my thought is that probably, it was probably this basin right here that really created the biggest problems for you. And once it gets in the groundwater, it takes a long time to get it out of the groundwater. So here's just the illustration of what happens. The water with the ash comes out here into the impoundment or the basin. It settles out. The water leaching. It's in water that's leached out the boron and the lithium. And then you've got rainwater and snow melt. That all goes through, and that contaminated water makes its way down to groundwater, and then you get a groundwater plume. And so this is just that's the kind of the general concept. It gets a whole lot more complex than that, but this is the basic understanding. So I poached this image from the state of Michigan. I figure they don't have a lot of copyright protections at the state. And I modified it to show you, you know, in more, to illustrate some more things. So right here is, imagine your impoundments and your Erickson plant, and it's created a hazardous waste, or hazardous substance. And it's got this, it's contaminated the ground, the waters, and the soils up in here, and that's leached down, and it gets into groundwater, and then it flows with groundwater. And you can think of it, a lot of people think of it as an underground river, but it's actually a lot more complex than a river, because it can flow up, down, sideways. It can go any direction, and it changes by the season, whereas a river stays in its banks for the most part. So it flows along as a more dilute plume, and it gets into people's wells. That's what happened to you. Now, what's important on this illustration, because you're going to see this similar illustration only using your your home and the impoundment areas, a more realistic rendering of what's happened at Erickson. But this is an important slide because you understand how you're getting your contamination in your well. But like I said, these are naturally occurring. So naturally occurring inorganic contaminants that are in your wells. Now, how do we decide whether it's from Erickson or it's just something that's natural? Well, what we do is we compare it to background water, or water that is not impacted by the contamination from the plant. And that's one of the biggest problems with this site, is figuring out where background is. And that is one of the problems with the investigation. It's not clear where background is. And so you see this is the background well here. And I use the illustration of searching for gold because people can relate to that. One of the problems with in the environmental business is you are looking for contamination that just costs everybody money, okay? So there's not a good financial motive to go search for this stuff. But when you're searching for gold or oil, there's a great incentive. So people do a much better job of finding gold and oil than they do environmental problems. It's a very odd thing, but I've always said as a geologist, we could go out and find oil 10,000 feet down in some terrible place to be, like the North Slope of Alaska. But we can't seem to find oil sitting on top of the groundwater 20 feet down below a tank. I mean, a monkey can find that, but because it costs people money, for some reason people can't find it. It's really bizarre, but that's my profession. It's weird. Anyway, so thinking about gold. If you go to a stream and you want to find the mother lode, and you find gold in the stream, this is going to explain background and how we find background. What you do in the stream is you just keep going upstream, panning for gold, and you're finding more and more gold. And as you get farther up the stream, suddenly you'll hit a patch of lots of gold. And then the next step up, you find no gold. Well, you know that because the water's flowing one way, you know that when you hit that pile of gold and then you went one step farther and there was no gold, that the gold originated there. It's the same principle when we do groundwater investigations. We just track it back up to the source. In this case, we already know the source, so we go down gradient looking to see where it ended up, sort of a different approach. But the background issue is still the same issue. This is the mother lode. Unfortunately, it's the mother lode of contamination. It's not what you really want to find. So you go up and you're trying to find this location where you're in the background. Now what's complicating here is this has got boron in it, this has got boron in it. And so if you're looking to see what Mother Nature did, and you don't do your job, say they actually looked at a well that was already in this plume. That's what they call background. They accidentally or on purpose got wells in this actual plume, and they said that's background. Suddenly, this plume disappears because they say, oh, well, that was all naturally occurring. What you've got in your wells downgraded, it must be naturally occurring. So that's one of the most important things. I'm sure Eagle's on top of that, is where is background actually? And I'll show you some groundwater plumes and stuff, or some stuff later that helps you understand why it's a complicated question. All right, so these are the contaminants that Board of Water and Light says are here at the site. Boron, calcium. Now calcium, we don't really think too much of it as a contaminant because it's a nutrient. We all need calcium. I mean, if you chew on a bone, you're getting calcium. There's lithium, molybdenum, sulfate. Sulfate's not super toxic, but it's not a very nice chemical anyway to be drinking. and total dissolved solids. So total dissolved solids may not represent any kind of thing that's toxic to you, but makes your water taste terrible, could cause you to have a lot of iron in your bathtub, those kinds of things. So this is what they say are the chemicals. Everything on focus. Yeah, I don't know if it's that or it's because I'm stealing it from a PDF.
Okay.
All right. So that's the list of the Board of Water and Light said are the problems. But we have questions about that. Are the contaminants identified? Is that the complete list? Did they say some of the contaminants are just actually background, and so it's not a problem? Did they not get their background in the right place? Are the specific criteria? So, well, let's say we'll take my fluoride. Say it was at one milligram per liter. And I don't know what the actual criteria is for fluoride, but 1 milligram per liter is the naturally occurring out at a site, out at my house, whatever. So the state wouldn't make anybody clean up my one milligram per liter fluoride because it's Mother Nature and you can't clean it up anyway. But if I had it back at this site, if I had a well that was in boron and a boron plume, they would say, oh, the boron is, say, it's 3 milligrams per liter here in this background location, which is a background. Let's say it's not background. That means they would say, okay, anything below 3 milligrams per liter, we don't have to clean up because that's naturally occurring. Even though criteria might be what's considered toxic might be less than that, because it's naturally occurring, they don't have to clean it up. So we want to make sure that whatever number they come up with is the right number, that they're not accidentally or artificially raising that criteria. So the question is, where's background and what is background? Very important for the site. So again, I brought up naturally occurring contaminants, why they're a problem. And are the background wells they chose truly the background wells? And again, Eagle will be your best friend with determining those issues. Okay, next. So this is just, this is really out of focus, but this is the wells that they have installed so far, the monitoring wells. So this is the monitoring wells that just drilled down. Show you what those look like in a second. Some are in what's called the glacial aquifer. That's the part of the aquifer which is just sand and gravel and stuff. And then some are in the bedrock. That's rock, Saginaw Formation. Okay, so this is the area of interest right now, and it could change as they get more data in or expand. But right now, here's the ponds, and here's the residents that are believed to be impacted by the plant up in here. And this is, so I looked up what's called the maximum contaminant level, and that's what EPA says is okay to have in your drinking water. Now, one of the things, and this is really important to understand, and again, the toxicologist will have to help you with this. The maximum contaminant level is the level that the federal government said can be in our drinking water. So, but if you're on the water system for Lansing, city water, they say that could be 1 milligram per liter of boron in your drinking water. So 1 milligram per liter, they would say that was safe. Now, one of the things that even I didn't understand for a long time was that this stuff is, most of those MCLs are based on old science. Maybe 40 years ago, they came up with this number. All right, we've got so much more information. We are so much more sophisticated now. A lot of these numbers are not really accurate for how toxic the chemical is. And I know nothing about boron or lithium. I never had sites with this problem. So, and because it's a lot to understand, I haven't dove into it trying to understand how big of a problem this is. But, so I just chose that MCL. So, all right, no, don't put a lot of faith in the MCL being safe, because a lot of them are outdated, but that's the law, federal law. And the state has more updated criteria. The state's doing a better job of keeping up on the science than the feds are. So anyway, this is your residential wells that in the neighborhoods that are impacted. And you can see everything to the right of that line are wells that have boron above this MCL, this drinking water standard. Some are below it. And where this actual criteria for the site cleanup is, that's going to be determined, like with Eagle and maybe, I don't know if the feds are going to be involved or not, but that'll be a decision by Eagle on what they have to clean up to. So, next. All right, now, this is a cross section, and I showed you a simplified, cartoon cross section when I'm showing you the plume and with the red blob and all that. This is an actual cross section from the site. And so probably for most of you, you've not ever dealt with cross sections and have no real idea how to read this or what it means. But this is how we figure out what's going on underground. And so in this cross section, up here, above here, all through here, this is the glacial material I mentioned. So if you go down to a stream and you see sand or gravel, that's what's down there. This is all laid down by water, great big rivers that came off the glaciers. And this might actually be ancient Grand River formations. Down here is the Saginaw Formation right here. That's the bedrock. That's where most of your wells are, is down in this. And this pink area right up here is the berms. So they drilled through the berms. And so what happens is they drill a well down through here and they log each material they're going through. And this is the same thing that's done in the oil business. Any well, your well driller just putting in a drinking water well does the same thing. They just drill through, they track what they're in. The well driller is looking for gravel or sand so he can get water for your home. The oil guys are looking for traps, but anyway, I won't get into all that. But anyway, it's the same thing, whether you're doing just these little shallow wells or you're doing big, long, deep wells. And so what we see from here is this is like a sand, I think, sand and silt, and layer 3 and 4, this blue one and this brown one are the ones that transmit the water. That's where your plumes are going to travel through the fastest, get into other areas. And then the contamination that started up here has to have gotten down into this rock to get into your wells. So this is more pertinent to your situation than this is more closer to realistic than the first cross section I showed you. So here's your site right here. There's the lagoons up there, and your groundwater is right close to the bottom of those lagoons. And so this groundwater is contaminated, and right now this is just theoretical or hypothesis that this water has gotten contaminated and has moved off-site to your homes about a half a mile to a mile and a half away and has impacted your wells. So that's the working conception right now. Not necessarily from the Board of Water and Light, but that's my working conception right now. And so this is the groundwater is flowing that way, and it's taking the plume down to your wells. And this is the map that they provided in the documents. So what Board of Water and Light provided. So here's the impoundments here. here's the farthest well they've drilled. Now, I think there's 4 wells actually at this location. So I don't know if we've gotten the data from that yet or not. But anyway, this is the closest they've gotten to your neighborhood. They need to go all the way down gradient as far as your neighborhood. And what you normally do is you track the contamination all the way down to wherever it goes. So if it goes down here, that's where you track it to. If it goes off this way, that's where you track it to. You track it to where it goes. And so they've got a long ways to go. That's why I said, that's one of the reasons I say they haven't done enough work to know what's really going on. So trying to say that it didn't make it to your wells is not appropriate at this point in time. And to their, one good thing is they're providing water anyway. So a lot of people will not do that because they think it admits guilt. So what I tried to do is, normally what is helpful, and responsible parties don't like to do this, is that you make a map that shows how far the contamination has gone and where it is in relationship to things you can recognize on the surface. Okay, so here's that oval area I showed you before. Here's your homes over here, and these are your wells, and this is the boron. It's representing boron in your wells. Now, these don't line up, all right? Because I had to take their funny drawing, and I tried to carry it over and lay it on top of this. And I'm not a media guy, so I'm not any good at it, and I don't want to work that hard on it anyway, because you don't really, you know where your home is, you know where your results are anyway. But this shows kind of how it goes. You know, you're here, and your wells are down here, impacted by something, and most likely Erickson, but I can't say that with 100% certainty. All right, so gone through a lot of stuff. I'm going to just now make an introduction to groundwater flow maps based on this stuff, because in the future, if you keep following this, you're going to see groundwater flow maps. And like I told you before, that's how we figure out how it gets to your well. And it's also how, if it's traveled to your wells, then they're going to have to intercept it in this groundwater. So again, this is really critical, is that they understand how the groundwater moves. And this is a very complicated site as far as how things are moving in the groundwater. And there's a couple reasons I'll show you why it's complicated. So this is the first map, all right? Looks like a real mess, and it actually is a real mess. What they're showing here is what you do on these maps, and any of you guys ever worked on a radiator, you know, you get a hole in it, and all the water is shooting out that hole. What is happening in a radiator is it gets pressurized, you get a hole in it, and all the water is going to this point with the lowest pressure, okay? The lowest pressure, that's where the water is going to go. So it's kicking out there. Same thing with groundwater maps. These are actually pressure lines. They're telling you how much pressure there is, essentially, and the low pressure point is over here. So this is kind of like this would kind of be at a high pressure. You look at the numbers. It's the elevation of where the groundwater is, but roughly speaking, it also is a measure of pressure. So the water is highest over here, and it's going down this way. Over here, it's highest, and it's going in this way. So this means there's a valley like something here that's drawing the water that way. And then again, here's another high point going that way. So this is kind of unusual. You got 3 high points in here. And anyway, they don't have enough data yet to really draw this super accurately. They're kind of you can see all these dashed lines. That's because they really don't know. They're just guesstimating at this point. So anyway, you don't have to really understand or figure this out, but it's an introduction, you know, because you'll hear these things again in the future. All right, this is the same. This is all up in the shallow glacial aquifer, and this is what the original groundwater flow looked like. So it was supposed to be just like this, okay? Doesn't look anything like the previous one that you saw. So, so there are so many technical things that are going on here that I would just confuse you completely probably if I tried to explain that stuff. But anyway, just know you're going to see more of these. And then here's another, this is down in the bedrock. This is where your wells are being impacted, okay? Down in the bedrock. So here we are at the Erickson site, and in the bedrock, it looks like groundwater is flowing towards your neighborhood, okay? But then it's really, this is a really weird looking map. If you're in my profession, this is an oddball looking map. And the reason it's so weird is they only have 4 wells down here. That's really not enough to fill in. I mean, there's a whole lot of detail in here that is probably should be dashed because it's only 4 points. But why? One of the reasons it's complicated is there's Delta Township has a well right here, and that's drawing all this water over this direction. And then the Grand River is over here, and I don't know if it's drawing from the Saginaw, but water will generally, in the groundwater, will flow towards where it's going to discharge. So if there's a river going through, most of the time you can bet that the groundwater is flowing in that direction. And the Grand River is a pretty big river, so it has a bigger influence on it. But this is in the bedrock, so not absolutely sure why it's flowing this way. There are also some extraction wells out here. So every one of these little things adds more complexity. And actually the hydrogeologists will probably love this because they got all kinds of things to work about, but when you're the ones that are drinking the water, it's not so cool. So anyway, again, I'm just showing you these so you got an introduction. Here I just wanted to show this is the last thing, except for conclusions. This is boron up here, and again, these are the residential wells, and here's that 1 milligram per liter. So all these wells up here have higher levels of boron in them than the MCL. This is lithium. Now, lithium I looked up, and all the numbers are below, I think it's the MCL. They're all below it. Yet I looked, and this is why toxicity is so important, so complex. The CDC has an agency called ATSDR, and if I worked at it, I could tell you what that stood for, but ATSDR. Anyway, they put out health advisories, health numbers, or EPA puts out a health advisory in conjunction with them. And what that health advisory is it says this is what the current science says. So the current science, from my understanding, is saying that the actual levels should be down here. So it depends on which criteria, which agency you're looking at, which law you're following. You could end up saying that, oh, all these here are above what's being considered safe. Now, lithium also is an interesting chemical because it's active on the brain. It was one of the first things used for psychological problems. They give people lithium. So it's effective in our brains, but that also means it's active in our brains. So I don't know really anything about the toxicity again, but that's an interesting one there. Okay, and last thing, conclusions. Environmental investigation is just starting, okay? And you'll see huge tables of all kinds of data, and you'll think, wow, they've done a ton of work, and the reality is it's not that much. It's not enough. Residential wells have elevated concentrations of inorganic chemicals, and they may have originated at the Erickson plant. And so that's to be determined still. And then the findings from this study will determine whether the Board of Water and Light is responsible for the contamination of the residential wells. So at this point, they're providing bottled water. It's a great thing to take advantage of. And Eagle will be working with, and I'm interested to see what Eagle has to say because they will have been in negotiations with the Board of Water and Light. They'll know really what's going on much more than I do because I'm just trying to look at the Board of Water and Light's their stuff that they put out. And any questions?
Okay.
Or don't,
So-
or we, I
so-
press for time?
Well, so,
Oh, yep.
we had been thinking that we would take about an hour and a half, so I want to be cognizant of your time. And it's about 7:45 now, so it's about 45 minutes left. And we got a couple other speakers we want to get through. So if you make a note of your questions, because I would bet 100% that you got questions after all of that. Then once we get through the other speakers, we'll come back and bring Bob back, and you can ask him and Evan McGuire from Eagle, who will be speaking in just a minute as well. So,
Okay,
thanks, Bob. Great presentation. All right, and next